Welcome everyone to Hume Council's session, Creativity Equals Brain Gym. We're pretty excited. This is I think our second recorded seminar for the Hume Galleries program. And this one's been organised to coincide with an exhibition by Elly-Louise Tyquin called Release. The show in a non-COVID world would have happened at the Sunbury Global Learning Centre, but instead we have the exhibition virtually up online on a site called The Exhibit. So I'll mention that again at the end of the session. But we're really excited to see all the interest in the session, and it's a beautiful theme to be exploring together. So today, I'd just like to start with the Hume acknowledgement of country. So Hume City Council recognises the rich Aboriginal heritage within the municipality and acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, which includes the Gunum Willum Bullock clan, as the traditional custodians of this land. Council embraces Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander living cultures as a vital part of Australian identity and recognises, celebrates and pays tribute to the existing family members of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and to elders past, present and future. I'd also like to thank in advance our speakers today. We have our artist and curator Elly-Louise Tyquin. So maybe you can wave when I think hopefully everyone can see your names anyway. Craigieburn artist Yelena Ashlapova, who is a composer and a student of psychodrama. And we have Matt Gleeson from Sunbury Community Health, who for some reason I've lost on my screen. I hope you're still there, Matt.
I'm still here. Sorry, I had some computer
problems. That's okay. It might be me.
My phone.
That's cool. So yeah, Community Partnership and Engagement Officer, and Tania Virgona, who is a professional art psychotherapist and somatic experience practitioner. You might explain that along the way, Tania, and clinical supervisor. So thank you for our speakers today. Yeah, so I just wanted to start with a quote actually. So I'm Anna Clabin. I work in community development in the arts and culture team at Hume. And usually I work out of the Sunbury Gallery, which unfortunately is closed at the moment. So we're hopeful that it'll be opening up again soon. But I wanted to, I'll be moderator for today. So I'll be asking a series of questions to our speakers, and we'd love you to listen to what the speakers have to say, but then feel free to raise your hand or comment if you'd like along the way. We'll see how that goes. I wanted to start with a quote by a Hungarian psychologist called Mihaly. I think his surname's Mihaly. Maybe Tania knows about him, but he wrote a book in 1990 called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And I think in a way that's what this session is really about. It's about how people become really involved in something and that has a benefit for their brain. So this author said, this is a quote from him: "The best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult or worthwhile." So we might come back to that quote later if it's relevant. And at the end of this session too, we will ask anyone to put their emails into the chat side. And if you want, we've got a post-event information kit that we can send out to you with a whole lot of references and things. Okay, so we might start our forum questions. I think Elly-Louise, we might have the first question. I think we're just going to start it in a way that each speaker will kick off. And if you, as I said, if you're happy to just let our four speakers have their say first, then come in if you like. You can turn your video on or off. It's really up to you. So our first question is, what sparks creative action for you? We'll ask that of Ellie. Would you like to kick off?
Yeah, I guess for me it's a couple of things. So inspiration and emotional states are probably the two main things that spark my creative action. In terms of emotional states, I think I tend to go to my art practice as a way of coping when I'm feeling overwhelmed with, I guess, all sorts of emotions just in response to daily living. So it kind of assists me in expelling that energy, in making soft sculptures and weaving. It's kind of a rhythmic process that I'm engaging in, which gives me a sense of calm most of the time. Not always, but most of the time I tend to come out of a session of making feeling a lot more like I've got a grasp on how I'm feeling. And then in terms of inspiration, I guess I draw upon a lot of sources in terms of online, like Instagram and Pinterest, looking at other people's work, I guess, other artists and other weavers. And yeah, looking at the textures and colours that they use in their work will then usually inspire me to create something as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I hope people have time to look at Ellie's exhibition online, because it's really, really beautiful, and very, soft and quite fun. Actually, there's a lot of playfulness in her work, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah. Would any the rest of you guys like to have some words on that?
I can kind of continue on with that in a way, because it's very close to how art therapy works, I guess. You know, it's a self-regulating way of just finding some level of calm, or a way to be with those emotions. I know for me, nature is definitely my inspiration. I've always in a relationship with it where I can witness it, and I use natural objects, or I represent natural objects and kind of distort them a little bit and make somehow it relevant to maybe how I might be perceiving things. And I find that I like collecting lots of natural objects. Like I've got like plan drawers with lots of shells and things that I've collected on my walks and things like that, and pull them together. And it's very much an organising principle for me. Like I like to organise these objects and put them in relation to one another, and that communication, that relationship is what sparks my interest, definitely. And it's like an organising aspect of myself. Yeah.
I guess the thing for me too is about being in the moment. So as a photographer who mainly works with other performers, what sparks my creativity is other people's performance or other people's art. So I mainly photograph bands, but also theatre, and sometimes paintings and stuff like that as well. But as a photographer, it's a moment in time, and so I have to be really present. And you know, we know through the lessons of things like strategies like mindfulness that being in the moment can be really helpful to people's mental health. It also brings me in contact with other people. So, you know, it really, it's other people and other people's performance that sparks my creativity.
What about you, Yelena?
Well, that's really interesting question. I mean, for me, creativity, that's some kind of state where I might initiate at some point where I'm in the mood and I am capable of doing something that would wake it up, or I might be spontaneously awakened by my creativity. So it's like one would be that I am in the role of the initiator of my creativity. Another one would be another role of something that initiates me. So the role of creativity, which is very, very, it's quite mysterious experience. And that might attend me basically in any place at any particular moment. Difficult to describe how that's happening. Definitely something to do with my brain activity.
The next question I might direct to Tania initially is, how do you manage your time to make space for creative work? Because when you try and balance it with work, paid work or other work, so yeah, how do you deal with time management for creative work?
Oh yeah, God, that's a big one. You know, over the period of my creative life, it's you know, it was always just kind of making art, but now you know, creativity could be in a range of things like cooking or gardening or and I find that the creative activity kind of meets maybe what I need at the time. Like I've just been doing a lot of mandalas recently, but I wouldn't say that that's a normal part of my artistic practice. But just something that I've been engaged in creatively. And I think at the moment, I'm just kind of taking whatever moment there is and understanding that it's kind of creativity in all moments, that there's that possibility there. But, you know, coming from art school and moving into that space, I always had a difficult time balancing time, money and space. You know, I either had time and no money, or I didn't have the space, or one of those things just never seemed to match up. But somehow I always did find the time because it really was a fundamental need of mine. And it's become really my life. You know, creativity has become my life. So it might not always be in an artwork now or in a body of work, which, you know, having come from art school, but that's, you know, kind of how you get taught to make art, as in a body of work. So I kind of feel happy about that because it feels a bit liberating in that way. Yeah, so I would say just, you know, seeing that as a possibility in all moments, you know, as possibility, creativity as what's possible, and having that as a perspective. And that one artwork doesn't have to hold everything, I think. Just kind of surrendering that it's an artwork in that time for what's needed in that moment. Yeah.
That's very philosophical. Yeah.
Probably has to be right now.
When I think about time, for some reason I think about Matt taking photographs of punk musicians late at night after he's worked all day at Sunbury Community Health, and I wonder how that goes. How do you deal with it, Matt?
Very poorly. It's definitely time consuming, and it's not just the late nights, it's editing and stuff like that too. Like I could spend 3 hours at a venue, that's going to be about 6 hours of sorting through photos and editing and publishing. You know, what we know about the arts is that there's very few artists out there that can earn a living purely from their art. And so by necessity, they have to have another job. And so that can be quite difficult to balance. And if you're really passionate about your art, like I can get lost in a wormhole. You know, I've warned friends and family all the time that, you know, I can get lost in an editing wormhole for 6-8 hours. and that can get out of balance at times. So that's one of the things as a practitioner, both interested in mental health, but also within the art, I have to kind of be mindful of that and keep on top of balancing things up.
Yeah, for sure.
But napping's also always really good too when you can get a chance.
Yeah, that's cool. Does it?
What Tania said was really refreshing, as I guess I would call myself an emerging artist coming from art school. It's very refreshing to hear somebody talk about it as creativity in all outlets. Because I think art school has a very structured way of teaching you how to be creative. So it's good to come out of that and hear people talk about how they've applied that in their life and balancing work.
Do you have a particular space that inspires you to be creative? And I think, yeah, Matt, I wondered if you had some thoughts about that. When you in your house, like where is it? And or is it always
no, within my house I can work anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, my chief tools are a camera and a laptop, so they pretty much just come everywhere with me. Editing, I'll just corner of the lounge room will do. I tend to just kind of zone out everything else that's kind of going on around me anyway when I'm doing that. But in terms of capturing images, the special spaces are obviously live music venues, performance spaces, but also the streets and abandoned spaces. So there's something a bit poignant about finding a space that hasn't been used for a long time or has been left empty. And quite often you'll walk into those spaces and it's like somebody left last month, and you know you'll find somebody's dinner plate or whatever, and there's some real stories to be told out of that. But yeah, in terms of actual process, I don't know, I've worked at the back of a bar editing photos while the shows have gone on, in an effort to get photos out in a timely manner. So yeah, I don't need a quiet or sacred space for my work.
Yeah. What about you, Tania? How do you go?
Yeah, I know. I need a quiet space. Definitely. And it's interesting to hear how different that is, because you know you're going into other people's spaces and like you're the observer of that space. And I feel like for me it's like I need time. I need to be able to hear myself or hear, you know, what's wanting to emerge, or to be the observer of objects and relationship between things. So it's like if I have too much going on in the background, or if I've got my own script going around what I have to do, it just kind of doesn't, you know, nothing. I have to create the space. I have to create the right conditions. Like when you're growing a plant, you know, you got to put the right things in the soil to make it grow. So, you know, studio space is always, it doesn't have to be a studio space. It just has to be a quiet space, and it has to feel like mine, not someone else's, you know. Or I remember going and making artworks in people's homes in these remote places, because I always loved to go somewhere, you know, in nature and do residencies and things like that. And that's okay, as long as I can make it my own, you know, spread out and kind of make it my own. But yeah, there's definitely something about my space, but also a space that also I can live in and observe. I always had this fantasy that I would kind of have a studio and just have my bed and my kitchen just part of the studio. Like it wouldn't be separate, you know, but now that I've got a family and everything, it's quite different. But yeah, I always just imagined that that's actually how things would be, so I could have this ongoing relationship with my artwork. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a big space. It just has to be kind of my space where there's enough quietness for me to want to exist and contemplate. I used to rent a studio and found that I hated going to these shared studios because there was no light, there was always, yeah, it was just an awful place to really exist.
Ellie's laughing there. So if
Yeah.
you had some similar experience.
I've just had a very similar experience. Like,
Yeah, it has to be a sense of home, doesn't it?
yeah, I rented a space and I was only there for 6 months, but it was there was too much going on, and like it just didn't smell right, and it's like,
Just noise, actually.
yeah,
I know,
noise
depending
and
on how
smell
you work. Yeah.
just feeling comfortable. Everyone was friendly that was in the rest of the spaces, but it was just the environment was too, I guess, dingy is the word for it. So I'm much happier. I've got my own space now, but I relate to Tania in that it has to feel like your own, to let the creativity come. Because I find if I'm uncomfortable, I can't make. It just doesn't. I could, but I guess the quality wouldn't be probably what I would like.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that a brief statement about creativity is doing as opposed to being? Like in a state of, like, creativity comes from a state of being, not from a state of doing, for me. And that's why the space, you know, has to be a place to hold that sense of being.
Yeah. So do you, when you're working with your clients, with your therapist hat on, is that something you communicate to them? Like, is that something you?
Yeah, well, we create
the importance of creating some space. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. A place to be is very important as opposed to do. And that's why the studio and the space and the conditions, even in the relationship between me and that person, has to feel safe and create the conditions for that to happen. Definitely.
Anyway, yes. Welcome to everyone on the call. As I said, I've always found it a little strange hosting when you can't see faces, but that's our world now. So our next question, which I think is for you initially, Elly, is do you involve others in your creativity, or is it usually primarily a sort of solo activity?
For me, am I on mute? No. For me, it's mainly by myself. I guess sometimes I'm drawing inspiration from other conversations with people, talking about struggles and things they might be going through, which is kind of prominent at the moment. But yeah, I'm mainly working by myself. I just haven't really found someone to collaborate with, I guess. That
sounds like an invitation.
Yeah. So I haven't really got to the working together part, especially in making something. But I've definitely worked with other people in terms of, I guess, installing my work, which is often good because others will give you a different approach to how you might present something, which will change how it's viewed.
Well, I don't know, Yelena, because I think psychodrama is by nature collaborative, isn't it? And maybe you'd like to explain a little bit about what psychodrama is, potentially.
Well, psychodrama, this is the therapeutic creative method, which is applicable to the groups, to the group work, in the group of people, or on individual basis, face to face. And that's basically the work that, whereas the one of the main aspects is to see yourself through the reflection in others, which is done by playing out the range of roles that you could be in, or invite other people to be in those roles, and using different techniques, like, for example, reversing those roles to find or to see the reflections that are happening at that moment. It's like, as I said before, for example, I imagine myself a flower, and let's say I invite Ellie to be Yelena. And then as a flower, I'm going to talk to Ellie as Yelena, and then I'm going to reverse roles with Ellie. Ellie is going to become the flower. I'm going to be the Yelena, and Ellie is going to deliver to me the message. Things like that might sound a little bit complicated, but psychodrama triggers imagination and spontaneous response to whatever situation, you know, we might work on. And yeah, that's very much about the group as well. So other people are invited, and we can just what I like in psychodrama, there is such an instrument that is called concretization. For example, we might decide that today we're gonna choose a little object that will be symbolizing today, what has happened today or how I feel today. And then we might just choose this object and just share a little bit about it and present it to everyone. And even that sharing about this little representation of ourselves in that particular day might create the space where our creativity is going to be awakened.
It sounds like you'll be very vulnerable often in that. It's one thing to perform together in a theatrical way, but to then have a psychological dimension to it, which is very personal as well. It must be very intense, I'd imagine.
It might be at times, but also it can be for example, if you don't want to be that vulnerable, you can say, I don't want to be vulnerable today. And here you are in your role of not be willing to be vulnerable, and we can look at it as well, if you wish, for example. So these are all the different sorts of possibilities around the roles that we might play out in the moment. Or for example, I resist, I don't care, you know, I don't like you, or I don't like what you're talking about here. Okay, let's choose someone to be that role and let's have a look on it.
Okay. With the opposition. Has
Yes.
anyone else in the group had experience with psychodrama? I don't know, Tanya or Matt?
Yeah.
Or Tanya has. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to share?
It's very powerful.
Yeah.
It's very powerful modality.
Mm.
Yeah. And it gets things happening very quickly. And I actually, yeah. I found it confronting, but at the same time, very good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, perhaps we can share some resources about that in our info kit if people are interested to look into it more, because there's a base centre in Melbourne, I think, isn't there? And, yeah.
Or, well, the place where I study is called Psychodrama Institute of Melbourne. Well, at the moment it's closed, but if you go and Google, they've got their website where you can read the information and
And you said you'd had, sorry, Yelena, I had a lag there.
Yeah.
Matt, you said you've had experience too? Have you with? Yeah,
Yelena and I have a mentor in common who has been a practitioner of psychodrama for quite a long time, and I've had an off and on relationship with Sue over most of my career, actually, and have done some of the psychodrama tools incredibly powerful, both in terms of my professional work, but also in terms of personal insights. You know, the reality is that as individuals, we're not one thing. There's a whole bunch of roles sitting underneath the surface, and exploring how they kind of contribute to the way that we carry ourselves through our life can provide some incredible insights.
Do you think you work with young people quite a lot? Do you think it's a technique that would be particularly useful for younger people, given that often they're a bit more, well, they're introverts and extroverts, but often young people are quite drawn to those intense.
Look, I'm not a I have to be really clear. I'm not a practitioner of psychodrama, but I've worked alongside practitioners, and there are a number of kind of creative modalities that are used with young people. So kind of play therapy, psychodrama, art therapy, a range of different kind of creative pursuits that can be used to with young people to kind of explore what's happening for them, and sometimes that can happen in a really non-threatening way. So I remember doing some training work a number of years ago with a youth drug and alcohol rehab up in Canberra, and they used to use play a fair bit with adolescents that were attending that centre, and it was a really kind of non-threatening way for young people to kind of explore what was occurring for them. So yeah, it's a number of kind of creative modalities can have use with young people, be incredibly effective.
Yeah, this question, I think this is initially addressed to you, Matt, and this is Ellie's question. Actually, I remember. So you might like to explain your question, because Tania and I were talking about this one before. I think this is a tricky one. Our question is: do you think the arts industry is less forgiving of mental health challenges than it is of physical or psychological issues? So that's a little bit of a complicated question, but Matt, do you have a
so I work predominantly with nighttime economy, so entertainment venues, theatre, and what we know is that there is a higher prevalence of mental health issues and mental health disorders amongst people that work in that industry, and that'll be for a variety of reasons. For example, we also know that anybody that's working night shift, for example, is going to be more prone or more vulnerable to experiencing some mental health issues during the course of their lifetime, because sleep deprivation is incredibly bad for your mental health. What I have found working with the live music industry in particular is that compared to other industries, they are reasonably forgiving of, and I actually don't like the term forgiving, they're reasonably accepting of the fact that people may experience some mental health problems along the way. Having said that, you know, that's just one subset of the community, and it's still an industry that is subjected to all the kind of community norms. And what our community norms say is that if you have a visible physical illness, then you're generally going to have that more accepted than, say, if you're experiencing mental illness. So in my day job, one of the things that I do is I'm a facilitator of the mental health first aid training. And we've trained a number of community members over the last couple of years around Sunbury to be mental health first aiders. And what I would love to see is that in workplaces and community, mental health first aid gets the same kind of acceptance as physical first aid, because the reality is I break my leg tomorrow, people are going to ask me, you know, what's happened, there's going to be a lot of care shown and all of that. But if I'm experiencing depression, I might get the same kind of responses from my workplace, from community, or indeed from family members.
That's so true. I remember, in fact, I neglected to mention in the introduction that this session has been organised for Mental Health Week. That's my bad. But I remember hearing Patrick McGorry, who won the Australian of the Year a few years ago now. He's a mental health expert, and I remember hearing him talk about it would be how useful it would be if people could start to talk and think about mental health as part of physical health. Like it's another aspect of a person's normal health profile. So, and in any one life, we can all expect to have an episode of mental health, ill health, as well as physical ill health. It's very normal. It's part of our overall health profile. I thought I think he helped set up the Origin centres. Is that right? From memory?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
If you think about it this way, 1 in 5 Australians will experience some kind of mental health issue, diagnosable, in the next 12 months. We can't say that 1 in 5 Australians will have a broken leg in the next 12 months. So that's how common it really is within our community. And so, yes, there is more done around identifying and recognising that and accepting it.
We've got a question in the chat here from Sabrina saying, how can we make mindfulness part of every day so we don't forget? Has anyone in the group got some suggestions about that?
I can touch on that a little bit if you like. I found sort of an avenue in that from dealing with grief and processing that mindfulness helps me escape from those feelings. And I've kind of found it through exercise, but kind of a softer exercise through body balance. It's like a mix of Pilates and yoga and mindfulness meditation. So I tend to do, they're like hour-long classes where at the end there's about a 10-minute long meditation, which I use as mindfulness. So I do exercises in that where I visualize different things that will help me cope, I guess, that day. And for a long time it was daily that I was doing that, whereas now it's probably 3 times a week, but that 10 minutes is so important. So I guess in terms of not forgetting, I guess that's kind of to do with scheduling. With me, sometimes I have to write it down that I'm going to do that today, and then I will do it rather than I guess not putting the pressure on to do it every day as well may work for some people.
Not making it too much of a task.
Yeah, sort of start small.
And
Tania, do you have... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, you can make it really small by just attaching it to a daily practice, like drinking a glass of water, for example. So just making that commitment that when you have a glass of water, I'm just going to be there and present for drinking that glass of water. And that can be a really good kind of starting point in terms of mindfulness practice, because hopefully we're all drinking water every day. And it's something that we don't have to schedule in. Yeah.
Actually, we had a young girl working in our office when I first started who had an app on her phone that reminded her to drink water, because she said she was someone who just didn't, for some reason, she didn't have the normal thirst triggers. So I thought that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. But that's you're so right, Matt. And there are various apps too, so that can help with mindfulness. There's the Smiling Mind, I think is a really good one. I think there's the international one, Calm. The Resilient Mind is something we've been using recently, but I don't know. Tania, do you have any comments there about?
Well, yeah, there's quite a few comments I could make. But I mean, I think the act of making, if you're engaging any kind of creativity, I feel like that's a very mindful act in itself. But also connecting to your senses and orienting to the here and now through your senses. Anytime, like just kind of what Matt was saying, really. But you can do it through your sound and touch and vision and taste. And that's always available to you. And I guess it is about just shifting your attention to that mindful state and deciding that that's something that we need to become aware of, or that's a practice that we're going to choose to become aware of in our day or in our moment, and understand, what our quality of presence might be at any given time. But bringing it back to the body, I find it to be a safe way and a simple way and a pleasurable way to do it. And it, you know, we don't have to go anywhere to do it sometimes. Yeah, so the senses definitely.
Yeah, use what you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Yelena? Do you have something you want to add there?
Yeah, I was basically, when we're doing something from our routine, if you change the nappy for your baby, or you're peeling potato, or you're washing dishes, it's just about, again, to bring attention fully towards what you're doing at the moment, and just to let yourself slow down a little bit and really be fully there in what you're doing at the moment, rather than doing something and being constantly occupied with a stream of thoughts and thinking about, okay, all right, next I have to do this and this and this and that. So if just to try to slow down your thinking stream by concentrating on exactly the thing that you're doing at the moment, you might start noticing, just let yourself notice the details that are happening. You might notice that your baby needs another size of the nappy, or maybe the dishes, you might notice a beautiful flower on your plate, or you might notice any other details, and that sort of is going to slow down your mind and bring your attention towards what's happening in the moment. And that also brings that kind of mindful state, mindful, so your mind is full, and by when you bring your attention towards what you're doing at the moment, and there is no actual certain particular need to go and remind yourself of constant exercise or on a daily basis. So that might make your day a little bit easier in that sense.
We've got a couple of questions left, and I might skip to one that we might ask you first, Elly. Are there times when creativity doesn't always help you and your state of mind? And are there barriers that can sometimes stop you being creative? I guess like a bad shared studio, from what you said, that didn't smell good. But
that's a good example.
Yeah.
My other one would be to do with time management as a barrier, because I'm one that fills my day with probably too much.
Yeah.
It's not achievable. Which I think I'm getting better at as I get older, but it's definitely a barrier for me, is going, okay, I'll do all this housework and then I'll get to my studio, and then it's 5 p.m. and I can't be bothered by that. So I'm trying to get better at that through scheduling. But yeah, I find I've got, at the moment especially, I've got my toes in a lot of different areas to, in a sense, to fund my creative practice. So I'm finding it a little bit hard to find time, which is funny and ironic because we're supposed to have all this free time in COVID. But I'm finding I have less time. But yeah, it's definitely the time management and work, and then things like what Tania was saying about just being. Sometimes I go in the studio and it's not like I start making it, I'm like, it's not giving me anything some days. So I've found it easier the more I've engaged in my practice to go, okay, I'm not getting anything done here, so I'll leave it for another day and I'll put my energies elsewhere. But that's taken a bit of time to establish, rather than, I guess, beating myself up going, why can't I do this? This is the time I set to do this. So I guess in a sense, I've learnt to be softer on myself with the barriers that come up. Yeah, I think it's important to be kind to yourself. Set goals, but if you don't always reach them, it's okay. Life can get in the way.
Yeah, yeah. It's nice to be gentle on yourself.
Can I add on to that? If you finished.
Yes, I'm finished.
Yeah. I just remember a period of time where the art making, you know, as a professional was so isolating actually. And that the isolation of the art making was really hard what was really hard about it. And I think that's probably why I slowly moved into the art therapies, because I did public art and did a lot of collaborative works with community and other practitioners, and then moved into the art therapy. And there's that time around, you know, when I'm holding a group for people, you know, that they can spend that time with themselves while in relationship or connection to other people. Because, you know, and then people go home and they find it really difficult to do that, because it is sometimes it's just very isolating being in that space, and actually what we're needing is more connection. But, you know, now in a busy time of my life, it's like, oh God, give me some solitude. It's like I want it badly.
It's not fair, is it?
Yeah.
Like, want too much of one or too much of the other.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, isolation, you know, being creative can be quite isolating. So I guess it's the balance, unless you're completely absorbed and got that flow like you were talking about before. Get that rhythm and get the task meeting your needs at the time, and extending yourself. Otherwise, it can be quite hard.
It can be. I think in response to that, it's definitely something that I might dive into the work for a few days and feel that sense of rhythm, and then come out of it going, oh, why do I feel so kind of alone?
Yeah.
Because I have been, but I'm so absorbed. But it's like I haven't quite got to acknowledging that it is isolating sometimes, and that it can be, it can give me a low mood. Yes, it's identifying that, which I'm still learning.
Yeah. Maybe, do you think some of that is when you have a creative, a creative urge, and it all comes out, and you just, as you say, in that state of flow, once you've passed that peak and you come down the other side, it's sort of the natural process, really. Just you've expended yourself and now you've just got to rest. So
sometimes, sometimes, not all the time. I think it varies depending on the project and whether it's something that's definitely
kind of like
small scale, large scale.
It's kind of like deep sea diving in a way, like you've kind of gone really deep in to this place, and now, you know, and, you know, emerging and then coming into contact, it's like, whoa, how do I do that again?
Exactly. It's a bit like you're disoriented it's like after you've seen a movie, if anyone remembers that. Wow, you know, when you come out of a cinema and you've lost your, in fact, apparently that's a thing, you lose your peripheral vision. So maybe it's the same thing, you've zoned in so hard, you're a bit wobbly.
Learning to socialise again. It's almost social skills, and refamiliarising with conversations.
I think we're all going to have to relearn the bottom of our face, aren't we, after lots of months and years of wearing masks? We won't know how to understand each other's faces. That'll be weird. Yeah. So what about you on that front, Matt? Are there times when creativity doesn't do it for you? It's not helpful. You have to.
Well, I mean, my experience is quite different, I guess, from what Elly and Tania have spoken about, because my art actually brings me into contact with people. You know, I predominantly photograph people rather than landscapes or street scenes. And so it's actually been a boon to my mental health in terms of social connection. What I've experienced in the last few months, though, and I don't think I'm on my own here, is that with COVID and restrictions on movement, restrictions on social interaction with people, that's been a real barrier. I mean, I can't go out and do my normal kind of work at the moment. And so that's posed some real difficulties. And I think that'll be reflected across the community, whether people are artists or not. And I have had some conversations with people who are actually quite concerned about how they're going to re-enter community again after having such a period of isolation. But definitely in terms of editing, you know, I can get stuck in an editing wormhole and experience stuff that Elly and Tania have, you know, very kind of accurately kind of portrayed, you know, that kind of, it's almost coming out of a dark theatre going, where have I been, what's happened, and I talk to anybody for 3 days, and that can be quite disorienting. But yeah, no, most of the time I'm working off the energy of other people. I'm a bit of a vampire artistically, and so as long as I've got that other people's energy around me, I don't experience a lot of barriers.
Yeah, I don't know. Does anyone else in the group want to comment on that as an idea? That even if you're a creative person, but sometimes it's not helpful, or you can't.
I'll actually say a couple of things, Anna. I find in my practice the pressure of the expectation of producing a body of work can actually do the flip reverse and make me want to run and not do the work. So that can be a problem sometimes if you have an expectation, a body of work, an exhibition, a timeline, and I'll often procrastinate right up until maybe a few weeks before, and then you just explode with all the work that you've got to do. Then you get busy in it, I guess, and you get in that flow because you have to. You're forced into it. But it can be a roadblock. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, there's nothing like the whole science of procrastination is another topic altogether, isn't it? Like what it is that blocks. Although, because I always think it's not that you're not doing it; you're doing it in your head all the time. It's just you've got a physical block with it's interesting. I don't know. Yeah.
Sometimes it's almost better without a deadline. Like without you just making from your own rhythm.
I think that's true. It's like whether you I've always found that interesting, having worked with artists and made my own practice for quite a lot of years now, is what's your main motivation? Are you making the work just for self-expression, or are you making it always with an idea that you want to share it with a public, and you have an exhibition, or you want to make money from it, or whatever it is, you know, what's that? Because there are different categories there, aren't there? Or are you doing it as something just to dive into and take you away from thinking about other things?
Personally for myself, I started off just doing it for myself, and I actually now want to try and, oh God, I'm getting low on battery. I don't know why that's happened. Anyway, basically, I started for myself, but now, yes, I want to make it a money business. You know, I mean, teaching has always been on the money side, but obviously I haven't been able to charge much for people to come and learn, and people expect to pay less. We're the only profession really that people expect to pay no more than $10 an hour.
Can I add to that and just say that the nature of arts in itself throws up a lot of stuff around self-worth and self-value. And it's inherent, because you have to put value on your own work and your own time, and when you go to put it out in the world, and you know who's going to like it and what you're going to get from it, that kind of thing. And then, you know, coming to know your own value, coming to trust it and rely upon it, and yeah, and kind of put that out there. And I mean, I see art, you know, having done, you know, being a professional artist and now into art therapy, you know, I can kind of really see that there's this continuum, which there, you know, where it's just mainly processing for your mental health and for your self-benefit, you know, where there's just a process and the end product means not very much. It's a form of communication with yourself, to taking it all the way to the other end of the scale where, you know, there's skill involved and it's about the object, and then it's for viewing, you know. So it's like there's this whole continuum, and I think kind of coming to know where you are on that continuum at any given time, and your intention, and where the value is in that, you know. Like as an artist, it's like there's a lot of warm-up work and work that you might throw in the bin, but actually adds to that end product. You know, and an artwork can take you years to finish. I mean, how do you put a value on that, you know? So it's just one of those things that is just a constant thing to think about and weigh up all the time.
Can I just...
oh, sorry, Matt. Yeah.
I was just going to say that's definitely been my experience with the music community. Obviously, I work very closely with music community, particularly around Brunswick, and none of those guys can play at the moment in front of an audience. But what I am seeing is lots of people going back into their home studios or writing or revisiting old music and renewing it in the meantime before they can go back out and perform. And so, yeah, all is not lost. There's a lot of creativity that's coming out of this time where people can't actually connect with others directly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we maybe we need to share those stories a bit more too. We've got a couple of questions left,
Okay.
and then a little bit of a wrap up at the end. But the next question I'd just like to address to Yelena, and you've covered this a little bit already, but maybe you'd like to expand on it, is what do you use to be creative? Like what your main materials, if you like? And I know you work across disciplines, so I find your work very interesting like that.
Well, let me think. Materials. Well, if that to imagine a representation of a summary of materials, that will be probably the first thing would be coming from music, from some kind of composition, spontaneous one, just reflecting on what is at the moment. And that musical composition might be reflected further on some surface, on canvas, with would that be oil or acrylic painting. And I might then further look at the painting that's been produced and reflect onto it further with some poetry. Yeah, so for poetry I use my telephone or my laptop.
In terms of the shift from, because I was kind of working in soft sculpture, both large and small scale, for a little while, and I actually had a break from making for a long period of time last year. So this year, actually talking about keeping past work, I was going through sketchbooks that I had from my bachelor degree a few years ago, and that's kind of when I came back to this idea of the illustration, which is almost pattern-like work in a way, And yeah, I kind of wanted to revisit that. So I began creating other work in response to what I'd found from the past. Yeah, and then in terms of the 2D, I kind of shifted this year to creating more wall hung pieces. I guess I started doing a tapestry workshop right before all the COVID happened. And that kind of, I participated in that workshop right in the middle of creating a body of work for the Hume show, which in a way, kind of not so much intentionally, I've subconsciously begun this, like adapted these things I've learnt in the tapestry workshop to creating this body of work. So I had all these intentions of creating these 3D objects, kind of wrapped in soft materials, and then I just ended up making all these wall mounted pieces without really thinking about it too much. They kind of just came out in a way, kind of how Shay was saying, it just all went.
Just happens. Yeah. Where did you do your weaving? Where was the course?
It was at the Australian Tapestry Workshop.
Yeah, so beautiful.
It's on the other side, or it's close to the city. It was just a 2-day workshop. It was quite good because I was already working with the similar materials. It felt really familiar. It just was a very technical workshop, which was interesting to kind of rein in, coming from a less technical way of making work. Yeah, so it kind of influenced the whole body of work.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, the Tapestry Workshop in South Melbourne, I think it is. Yeah, they've created enormous tapestries, sometimes interpretations of paintings by artists. And I think there's work up at the airport. Not that anyone's been there for a while, but some of the embassies, they've just these enormous tapestries that are often worked on by several weavers at once.
That's incredible.
You can visit. It's really such an incredible space to go to.
They do open days, I think, a couple of times a year. Obviously not at the moment. I think they're actually struggling quite a lot right now.
Yeah, they probably are.
But yeah, it's really amazing to look at the way they work, because they'll have 3 or 4 weavers working on this 5 or 6 meter wide work, and it's just like what they're doing is so small, and it takes maybe 6 months to a year to create one piece. It's just brilliant. It was very, very inspiring.
It's a very unique form of art, isn't it, that harks back to history. And we think about all those old walls of castles covered with tapestries to try and keep them warm. I think of them as historical things. Yeah. Interesting. So we've got the last question, and it's probably a summing up question, really, but it's an open question of how does creativity aid your mental well-being in particular, as opposed to the general idea of, it's good to be creative for your mind. How does it help you specifically, if you in terms of timing, or even, has there been a particular time when it's been really useful?
Yeah, well, I think, creativity makes me, it does so much really for me, where I just feel like now my whole life is really, that's the core of my life, and, bringing things into being. And I it can hold me when I'm got strong emotions. Like it provides a space for me to be able to be with myself in a caring, compassionate way, or it can hold volatile emotions. But then it also can be, you know, quite a spiritual experience where I feel like I'm connecting with something greater than myself, or I feel like I'm hearing myself, or I'm seeing myself. So it creates this whole spectrum of validation of my existence. And when it gets birthed into this object, or, you know, a beautiful meal, or, you know, a collaborative outcome, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it validates that internal process. So creativity is really a very important aspect, and I feel like through the COVID and noticing how important it's been for people, you know, through the groups, and it's like it's kind of got this, it's becoming more apparent how important it actually is in people's lives. And it's not just kind of this hidden thing that only artistic people do, but actually it's an important aspect of recovery and healing on all levels, whether it's, you know, physical or mental. So yeah, I kind of maybe creativity is my god. So,
I like that. Yeah.
yeah. So maybe that's, yeah, I'll just put that down like that.
That's a really solid underlying conclusion. That's great.
Definitely our senses can be a very strong trigger for things. So we know, for example, sense of smell can trigger memories. We can be brought to tears by a piece of art, whether it be a movie, music, a still image. So there is a very strong relationship there, but there's also, with some diagnoses, there can be issues with how our senses are fed back to the brain. You know, so if we're talking about psychotic type illnesses like schizophrenia, for example, all the messages from the senses get scrambled on the way to the brain, is the simplest way I can put it. And so that can pose difficulties too around people interpreting the sensations that they have. I guess from my perspective, the most beneficial thing though is around just being able to be in the moment and being able to just divert our attention to what our senses are telling us. So, you know, coming back to the things like, you know, mindfully drinking a glass of water, or mindfully sitting in front of a piece of art and just taking it in and being present.
I guess I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for the speakers for participating, and the people that have come and shared their experiences. I think these are the kind of conversations that I'm very interested in going forward, because as we've touched on mental health, I think in the scheme of physical or psychological issues, I think it's not talked about enough. I think that's just from my experience in, I guess, my own family, friends, connections, but I find it's still that topic that people don't know how to broach with others. And I've found that art is a good way to begin that conversation.